Hi there, everybody. This is Woody from MakingYourWebsiteWork.com. Part of our XHTML and CSS online training modules include how to use div tags to create a proper document structure. We're going to walk you through that process now. We used a Photoshop layered document to try and walk you through some of the basics. Div tags are used to separate on-page content. They're also used as div IDs or div class statements. They're supported by CSS structure or cascading style sheets. When you first create your document, you'll see you'll get a container. In this case, it's 900 pixels wide, and we call it div ID page container. The next step is to create your header. That's at the top. In this case, it's a div ID page dash header, and it's 100 pixels deep. And then we have a div class, not div ID, div class header left, and a div class header right. Those are sub-elements inside that div ID header. Then we come down to a div ID page content. This is 500 pixels high, and we cut that into pieces using, again, div classes. So here, div class left, div class center, and div class right. And finally, we go down to the footer, which is also 100 pixels high, and we create a master container there. We call it div ID page dash footer, and then we put a one-columned div class footer center in the middle of that. If you refer back to video number 3 in this series, you'll remember where we worked on the header and the head tags, specifically where we point to the default CSS file. Here is that default CSS file. You'll see at the top we open the body, and you can see it's constructed by using open squiggly brackets and close squiggly brackets to the right. In this case, margin :0 with the auto puts it at the top of the page, and it centers it left to right. You'll get to see us using div.clear statements later on in the module. Here's an entry for some text styling. But by far and away the most important part of the CSS file for this module is down here, where we have our div statements. A div number sign refers to a div ID, whereas a div dot right, or dot left in this case, refers to a div class. That's a very important distinction to make. So you see the div number sign page dash container. That's what we use in the CSS to get ready to open up our entire website page, or the container for the website elements. There'll be many times you'll see CSS files structured like so with the blue highlighted box. That's just fine. We like to do it all in one line, as you see in our files. So just reviewing, div number sign page dash content is a div ID, and div dot right is a div class. Another concept you need to learn is the text align. In this case it's center, but we can align it to the left, in the center, or to the right. You also need to learn what floats are. We'll get to that in another module, but you can float it from the left or from the right. Another common attribute is the padding attribute. We'll get to that a little bit later. Now we move over to the actual HTML coding itself. First thing we do is we open our body tag. That's open bracket, body, close bracket. Then you'll see throughout this module these gray lines. These are to help us keep our document organized, and by putting an open bracket exclamation dash dash in front of it and a dash dash close behind it, it will not show up in the browser. So there's our first div ID for the page container. That's an open div statement. So now we're going to move down to the div ID, the page header. This is a header that's inside the container, the master container, and if you remember the CSS at the top of the page. Then we go into a div class, which is the sub-element or the left-hand side of the header. You'll see a little bit of text there, a little bit of content, and then we close that div statement. This is important. You can see then, once that div statement was closed, we open up the right-hand div class statement and then close it here. So far, the page header is still open. This is where we close the actual page header with the close div tag. So there it is, open the page header. You've got the classes inside of that, and then we close it with that close div tag. Here's a div class equals clear. This clears any floats in the previous div tags. We'll get to that in some detail in another module. Now we're moving down to the page content underneath the page header. There it is, a div ID to open the page content, followed by a div class similar to the header, and then we close the div for the left class. Then we open the class for the center column, and we close that. And then finally we open up the class for the right-hand column, and we close that. As we move down, you'll see there's the close div tag for the open div ID equals page content above. Also followed by a div class equals clear. Finally, we move to the page footer. This is very similar to the page header, but in this particular training instance, we're using one column across the entire footer, which is 900 pixels wide. That's why we only have the one div class equals center. And finally, at the very bottom of the document, you want to close your body tag and your HTML tag. That's very important. So once you finish your coding, you can test it in the browser. You'll see here up in the header, there's the left side of the header, the right side of the header. We move down to the content. There's the left column we created, the center column, and the right-hand column. Both of the right and left columns are 200 pixels wide, and of course the footer. You may have some questions about this particular online tutorial, and if you do, we can help right here and right now.